You could be forgiven for thinking that Icelandic football's rise and fall was nothing more than a tiny country very briefly overachieving before fading back into the shadows from which they had emerged. Perhaps some of you hadn't even noticed their demise at all. After all, if you're not Icelandic, the results of the Iceland national team might not be the first thing that you look out for during each and every international break. If you aren't entirely familiar with Icelandic football's rise and fall, and the truly mind-boggling extent of it, allow me to give you a very brief rundown. In June 2012, at the same time that Euro 2012 began, Iceland dropped to an all-time low of 131st place in the FIFA World Rankings, below Luxembourg, Tajikistan, and the Faroe Islands. Iceland is a small country, but it is practically China when compared to the Faroe Islands, a tiny archipelago about halfway between Norway and Iceland, which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark and has a population of just 48,000 people. That makes the Faroe Islands about the same size as Yeovil. Iceland won just one game in Euro 2012 qualifying, against Cyprus, making it all the more extraordinary that from that incredibly low base, the lowest in the history of Iceland's national team, just 4 years later, they qualified for Euro 2016, Iceland's first ever major tournament, becoming the smallest country to ever qualify for the Euros finals. Iceland didn't just qualify for the Euros though, they got out of a group containing Austria, Hungary, and eventual winners Portugal as Group F runners-up, without losing a single game before sensationally beating England 2-1 in the round of 16. In what was one of the greatest nights in the history of Icelandic sport, and one of the worst for England. What's more, Iceland quickly proved that they weren't just one summer wonders, finishing top of their group, ahead of Croatia, Ukraine, Turkey and Finland, to qualify automatically for the 2018 FIFA World Cup finals in Russia. This time, becoming the smallest country to ever qualify for the finals of the FIFA World Cup as well. By the beginning of 2018, Iceland had risen to an all-time high of 18th in the FIFA World Rankings, up from 131st less than 6 years earlier, climbing above the likes of two-time World Cup winners Uruguay, Sweden, and the Netherlands. This was one of international football's all-time great fairy tales, and to say that the people of Iceland had firmly bought into it would be something of an understatement. 99.8% of Icelandic TV viewers tuned in to watch Iceland's historic 2-1 win against England, with the remaining 0.2% estimated to have accounted for just 650 people. Whilst it was always going to be difficult to maintain that level of success and enthusiasm for Icelandic football, it seemed as though a legacy had been built and an unbreakable bond between the Icelandic public and their national football team had been formed. It appeared as though Icelandic football, from their FA executives down to the coaches and players, could do absolutely no wrong. Yet, just a few years on, all of Iceland's gains looked to have been lost as quickly as they were won, with all of those precious memories having been permanently tainted by a scandal which has rocked Icelandic football and society. On the pitch, Iceland have won just one of their last 12 matches, against Liechtenstein, a country which is roughly a tenth of the size of Iceland, during a run of form which has involved defeats against Romania and North Macedonia, in addition to draws with Armenia and Uganda. Hungary knocked Iceland out of their Euro 2020 qualification playoff, and in 2022 World Cup qualification, Iceland finished second bottom of a poor group during what was a wretched qualifying campaign. From 18th in the FIFA World Rankings in 2018, Iceland have dropped all the way back down to 63rd now, and they are still falling. Most importantly, and most sadly, Icelandic football and the Iceland national team have lost the love and affection of their supporters, with whom they once shared such a close bond, encapsulated in the iconic Viking clap, which was performed by players, coaching staff, and supporters alike in unison, in a demonstration of togetherness that even as an England fan, after the disappointment of losing that game, you couldn't help but admire. Whilst, at one time, as the viewing figures that I mentioned earlier illustrated, Iceland's national team captured the hearts and minds of an entire nation, In 3 out of Iceland's last 4 home games, there has been fewer than 2,000 fans in attendance, and that has far more to do with Iceland's difficulties off the pitch than on it. On August 13th, 2021, an article was published in the Icelandic online newspaper, Visa.is, written by Hanna Björg Vilhelmsdóttir, which was entitled About KSE and Misogyny. But in Icelandic, of course. I have translated it for your benefit, which I will be doing a lot in this video, in addition to horribly mispronouncing a lot of Icelandic names I've no doubt. The article was a very short but scathing account of Icelandic football's governing body, KSE, Iceland's equivalent of the Football Association, and gave a harrowing account of a young woman who had come forward to say that she had been gang raped in 2010 by 2 members of Iceland's national football team. The author of the piece, Hanna Björg, alleged that this woman was not the only woman to have come forward with allegations of sexual violence and abuse at the hands of members of Iceland's football team, and nor were the alleged perpetrators the only Iceland players who stood accused of committing acts of sexual violence. The article was not ambiguous in its critique of the KSE, accusing the organisation of silencing the violence of abusers on their behalf and of sacrificing girls and women at the altar of the men's team being competitive. It called upon the KSE to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem, and to send out a clear message that violence carried out against women ought not go unpunished. Visa.is is Iceland's second most popular website, and the article caused an immediate storm. The allegation of gang rape dating back to 2010, which was the only definitive incident that Hanna Björg referred to, whilst alluding to others that existed, had actually been made public by the woman involved sometime earlier on social media, in a post that any sane person would struggle to read entirely without wanting to weep. But no journalist had picked it up, and it didn't appear to gain much attention. That all changed with Hanna Björg's article, and initially, the responses were fast and furious. As rumours began to circulate about who the players involved might have been, which other players might have had allegations made against them, and what the KSE had done to cover these stories up, the organisation itself and their president, Gylfi Sigurdsson, formerly of Tottenham and Bolton Wanderers, came out fighting. 4 days after the story broke, they put out a statement claiming that the KSE had never attempted to silence or suppress cases of violence or assaults. Briefly, there was support for the KSE and Sigurdsson. After all, this was the national team that had brought so much joy to the people of Iceland, and players who were hailed as national heroes. Hanna Björg even received her fair share of criticism from some for attempting to besmirch their fine names, albeit without stating any names directly, and for dragging the organisation through the mud. Fortunately, not everyone was as quick to denounce the teacher and chairwoman of the Gender Equality Committee of the Icelandic Teachers Association who had penned that article, and the media's persistence eventually led to Sigurdsson staging a television interview in which he stated unequivocally that he had not received any formal complaints of sexual violence during his time in the job. The following day, another woman, Thorhildur Gjør Arnarsdóttir, gave a live televised interview in which she directly contradicted Sigurdsson's claims, but in a case that was unrelated to the 2010 gang rape. Arnarsdóttir said that in September 2017, an Icelandic international had grabbed her between the legs and around her neck in a nightclub in Reykjavik, which she had reported the following day to the police. The police said that they would investigate, but nothing came of it. Arnarsdóttir told her father about what had happened to her, and when the player involved was recalled to the Iceland squad, her father decided to report the incident directly to the KSE. Arnarsdóttir's father and brother were actually due to attend the game that the player in question was recalled for, but her dad didn't want her brother cheering on the man who she accused of having sexually assaulted his sister, hence why he felt the need to go to the KSE. Already, by this stage, the public mood was starting to shift, and Sigurdsson's claim that he had made a mistake in his interview when he said that he had received no formal complaints of sexual violence because he, quote, thought that this crime had been a violent crime and not of a sexual nature, end quote, didn't really wash with an awful lot of people, and would eventually lead to him losing his job. At a KSE board meeting, Bergson offered to temporarily step aside until the matter had been resolved, but the board, reportedly angry that they had not been made aware of Arnarsdottir's father's formal complaint and the allegations against one of Iceland's players, rejected that request. So the former Premier League centre-back resigned. The rest of the KSE board maintained, quite credibly, that they had never been made aware of the formal complaints, and Bergson's supposed claim that he couldn't relay the allegations to them because the information was confidential was heavily disputed. Nonetheless, the statement that the organisation had put out when Hannah Bjork's article was first published, denying that they had ever attempted to silence or suppress cases of violence or assault, even if the rest of the KSE board did believe that to be true at the time, was too toxic for there not to be severe consequences, particularly with rumours abound of further allegations still to come. Despite releasing a statement of contrition in which the board pointed out that they hadn't previously had all of the information that had come to light at their disposal, public opinion had turned against them. It appeared, from the outside looking in, that the extent of the problem was such that it couldn't be attributed to any one or even a handful of individuals, but that it must be a systemic and cultural issue within the organisation, and that therefore radical change was required. A day after publishing their apology, the entire KSE board resigned. It is worth noting that Arnarsdottir did not come forward to report the abuse that she had suffered in a Reykjavik nightclub in 2017 in order to expose her accused perpetrator, but because she was angered about Bergson lying about never having received any reports of sexual violence or complaints. Had he said from the very beginning that he had received those reports from Arnarsdottir's father, or just that he had received them from anyone, perhaps the slew of allegations that followed, ultimately naming several Iceland players, would never have come to light, and perhaps Bergson would still be in the job. Within 5 days of Arnarsdottir giving her television interview, Kolbeinn Sigthorsson, who a lot of people already suspected of being the player involved, issued a statement denying the charge of assault, but admitting that he had made an out-of-court settlement with Arnarsdottir and her friend, who had also made a complaint. 2 days earlier, Sigthorsson's club, IFK Gothenburg, had released their own statement confirming that one of their players had been implicated. And though they stopped short of actually naming the former Ajax striker, the fact that he was the only senior Icelandic international in their squad at the time meant that it didn't exactly take Colombo to figure out who they meant. In Sigthorsson's own statement, he admitted that his behaviour was, quote, not exemplary, end quote, and provided the details of the financial settlement that he had made with the two women. Sigthorsson's lawyer had initially offered them just 300,000 Icelandic krona, equivalent to less than £2,000, to sign an NDA, or non-disclosure agreement. After that was rejected, Kolbein's lawyer came back with an offer of 1.5 million Icelandic krona, which is closer to £10,000, and the women eventually agreed to take the settlement when Sigthorsson also committed to double what he was offering them, but to pay half of that money to Stigmot, an Icelandic NGO which provides counselling and support services to the survivors of sexual violence. If Sigthorsson thought that going public with the details of his settlement and charitable donation would make the problem go away, he was sorely mistaken. According to the women, they had only agreed to the settlement not just because Sigthorsson had offered to donate to Stigmot and because these cases are notoriously difficult to get convictions, but also because he had spoken to them, claiming that he was too drunk to remember anything that happened that night, but saying that he believed them and apologised for what he had done. Arnarsdottir and her friend said they believed him at the time, but when his statement came out, denying what they say he had apologised for doing to them, Arnarsdottir's friend, Johanna Helga Jensdottir, also came forward, claiming that his account of what happened that night violated the terms of their agreement. A day later, IFK Gothenburg's largest supporters group, and Ultras, put up ribbons around the club's ground and demanded that Sigthorsson's contract be terminated. The club suspended Kolbeinn, but didn't actually terminate his contract. However, the fact that he underwent foot surgery, and his contract expired in January 2022 anyway, before he had returned to full fitness, meant that he never played for the club after the allegations and his denials were made public. Nor has he played for Iceland since then, and the 32-year-old is currently without a club. It should be noted that Kolbeinn Sigthorsson is Iceland's joint record goalscorer of all time, tied with Adiger Johnson, and he would almost certainly hold that title outright now had he not been dropped from the national team. Sigthorsson was also the man who scored the winning goal for Iceland against England at Euro 2016, just to give some idea of how intimately these allegations are tied to the legacy and memory of Iceland's golden generation and to their biggest moments, which once seemed so special and still do to some. However, it is not just Sigthorsson who stands accused of committing a violent sexual assault, which he still denies. Iceland's other goal scorer in that game, Ragnar Sigurdsson, who stunned England by scoring the opening goal just 6 minutes into the match, was also implicated in the scandal. On July 5th, 2016, just 2 days after Iceland were knocked out of Euro 2016 by the host nation France, police were called to Sigurdsson's house by a neighbour. But by the time that they arrived, Sigurdsson had fled the scene, with his apartment badly damaged. The centre-back's wife at the time filed a police report accusing him of threatening her. When Ragnar was called in for questioning by police, he denied having been threatening or violent towards his wife, and nothing more was done. The same neighbour who had alerted the police also reported the incident to the KSE, but no action was taken, and the story wasn't actually made public at all until more than 5 years later, in September 2021, when the scandal broke and the KSE was in crisis. In July 2021, so before Hannah Bjorg had written her first article and the entire KSE board was forced to resign, it was reported that Greater Manchester Police had arrested a 31-year-old Premier League footballer on suspicion of child sexual abuse offences, but they did not name the player in question. At roughly the same time, Everton announced that they had suspended a first-team player pending a police investigation, but they too did not name the player, nor did they confirm that it was the same player who was under investigation by Greater Manchester Police. Morgunblaðið, the most popular news website in Iceland, reported that Gylfi Sigurdsson, who is arguably Iceland's most talented player and surely their best known of the current generation, was the player who had been arrested. Sigurdsson, who played 44 times for Everton last season, hasn't played a single minute of football as the Toffees have fought against relegation this season. Currently, there are at least 5 Iceland players with allegations against them who have been named directly within the Icelandic press, none of whom have actually admitted to or been convicted of any criminal wrongdoing. Longtime Iceland captain Aron Gunnarsson is one of them, accused of having been one of the 2 players, along with fellow former Premier League player Egert Jonsson, who was involved in the 2010 gang rape. Both players have strongly denied the allegations, but Gunnarsson hasn't been picked by Iceland since those reports came out, despite being the national team captain, and he gave a statement in which he blamed cancel culture for him being left out. Other players, such as Burnley winger Johan Berg Gudmundsson, has not been accused of anything but has voluntarily withdrawn from the squad, reportedly due to his former teammates having been left out. Gudmundsson previously stated of his decision to withdraw from the Iceland squad, "I can fully admit that it influenced my decision this time, that I have not been completely satisfied with the FA's working methods in recent months." The new president of the KSE, Vanda Sigurdsdóttir, who is the organisation's first female president, urged Gudmundsson to meet her so that the KSE could explain all of their decisions. But since that statement, the Burnley man has not played a game for Iceland. Only one player who made Iceland's Euro 2016 squad featured in the country's most recent squad for friendly games against Finland and Spain, which Iceland drew 1-1 and lost 5-0 respectively. There is always going to be a turnover of players in international football over a period of 6 years. England's most recent squad only had 5 survivors from Euro 2016, but Iceland's turnover has not been organic. So much of Iceland's success between Euro 2016 qualification and the 2018 World Cup was built upon a fierce team spirit and togetherness built around a core group of leaders within the squad. Now that spirit has been decimated, and almost all those leaders are long gone. Goalkeeper Hans Thor Halldórsson, who doesn't have any public allegations against him, is one player who has just retired, and has been a big loss. Meanwhile, Former Aston Villa man Birkir Bjarnason, who is Iceland's all-time record appearance holder, is just about the only one of Iceland's golden era stalwarts who still remains. Iceland's biggest success came under the management of Lars Lagerbäck and his assistant Heimir Hallgrímsson, who famously also worked as a dentist. Hallgrímsson became Iceland's head coach after Euro 2016 when Lars Lagerbäck departed, and he continued Iceland's impressive run of results. However, following their group stage exit at the World Cup in Russia, which still represented a very creditable showing, Hallgrímsson resigned and took a 2.5-year deal with Al Arabi in Qatar, taking national team captain Aron Gunnarsson with him. Iceland's current national team boss, Arnar Vidarsson, who got the job in 2020, has been given a pretty tough ride, being met with such a tumultuous time not long after his arrival. But a lot of people in Iceland feel as though the 44-year-old is out of his depth regardless. A club legend at both Lokeren and Cercle Bruges in Belgium, Vidarsson retired in 2014 and had worked predominantly as an assistant coach before getting the Iceland job. His only experience as a first-team coach was a brief stint at Cercle Bruges more than 7 years ago and 13 games managing Iceland's under-21 team. His win percentage of just 17.64% in charge of the Iceland national team is less than half that of Lagerbäck and Hallgrímsson's, and it is the worst of any Iceland manager since 2007. Ida Smári Johnson, who is one of, if not, in some people's eyes, the greatest player that Icelandic football has ever produced, and who played a cameo role as a 37-year-old at Euro 2016, was appointed as Iceland's assistant manager in December 2020. His time in the job would be short-lived, however, as the former Chelsea and Barcelona star, who has had difficulties with alcohol and gambling in the past, left his post, reportedly due to him drinking heavily, along with other members of staff and players, following a game against North Macedonia. There are those who have denied the suggestion that there was a culture of misogyny that ran through Icelandic football, and both the survivors and journalists covering the story have been met with a torrent of sadly predictable abuse, labelled as being sluts and attention seekers, and accused of lying and trying to ruin other people's lives. Of course, almost all of the women involved, some of whom have come forward publicly and others who have preferred to remain anonymous, only did so when others went public with claims that they say are untrue because they wanted to counter those claims which they saw as denying the pain and trauma that they had been through. Another claim that is often made, seemingly in defence of the KSE and of Icelandic football as a whole, is that football in Iceland is no more misogynistic and can no more be described as having a rape culture than Icelandic society as a whole. Of course, that may well be true, but it is not a defence of Icelandic football. Rather, it is a damning indictment of endemic misogyny, and this is a country which is often held up as being one of the safest for women anywhere in the world and one of the best countries for women to live in. Again, perhaps that is true. I don't know. But even if it is not so much a badge of honour for Iceland as it ought to be a scar of shame for every country throughout the entire world. I must admit that until the start of this year, when an Icelandic subscriber got in touch with me about Iceland's Football Association, I was unaware of pretty much everything that I have discussed in this video. It is not as though none of it was reported on, even in English, some of it was, but the prominence of it and the column inches that it was afforded possibly reveal a deeper truth about the way in which violence against women is so often reported, particularly when the perpetrators, or accused perpetrators, are wealthy and well known. There are several high-profile footballers who have been either very credibly accused or actually convicted of committing violent sexual offences in recent years, some of whom have gone to prison, some of whom have escaped justice, and some of whom the mere mention of allegations against them, and even their own previous statements, will see you met with a torrent of abuse from sycophantic fans on social media. Football is a powerful sport. It is the most popular sport on the planet, having conquered virtually every corner of the globe, and for many of us, it holds a special place in our hearts, tied indelibly to certain friends, family members, moments, memories, and emotions. All of that is important, and we ought to cherish it. but we should never let it blind us to injustice. Whether that be those who exploit the sport for ill-gotten financial gain, villains who seek to use the sport to launder their own reputations, or those who take advantage of their pre-existing popularity in football to evade justice for their crimes outside of the sport. The issue of racism in football has rightly been highlighted over the last couple of years, in light of several shameful incidents, along with the Black Lives Matter movement, which was embraced by many people within the game. They say that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, and that was a conversation that started outside of football but permeated the sport, raising issues that had previously been overlooked. The same cannot be said, broadly speaking, for the Me Too movement. Icelandic football may seem like a particularly egregious example of misogyny and of football permitting and covering up sexual violence against women, but it seems likely, and indeed we know for a fact, that Iceland is not a unique case. It is just a country that has been forced to have a reckoning due to the work of journalists, activists, and most importantly of all, survivors of that abuse. For Iceland fans, there now exists an uneasy relationship with the national team, and conflicted memories of their success. Parents are having to try and explain to young children why their favourite players are no longer in the national team. Posters of the team and specific players used to be everywhere in Reykjavik. Now they have been vandalised or are slowly being taken down. The Viking clap, which was once the symbol of Iceland's national team, adopted by teams across the globe, is no longer being performed. Its symbolism has been tainted too much. For some, it just wouldn't feel right anymore. Those wounds will heal, with time. New players will emerge, a new identity will be forged, and a new relationship with supporters will be built. But for the survivors, their wounds may never heal. Those scars run too deep. As the survivor of the 2010 gang rape wrote on her Instagram account in 2021, "It's almost 11 years ago, but not a day goes by that this does not enter my mind. It robbed me of so much. Self-confidence, joy, opportunities, experiences. I was going to sue. I hired a lawyer, went to the police station, and filed a report. But wherever I went, I was told that this was a difficult case, happening in another country, and them being both against me. I was repeatedly asked if I wanted to put this on myself. After many months of waiting, I decided to quit. I wasn't strong enough. My mental health couldn't handle it. These men were known, one of them, nationally known today. I was repeatedly reminded that if I complained, it would affect their careers. It would go to the papers, and everyone would know about it. The questions I got when I told people that have stuck with me are you sure you wanted this, but then regretted it? What I thought then, and still think sometimes today, is that no one believes me. It is disgustingly hard to have to say #MeToo, and I wish it on no one. I can tell I just cannot name. I do not want to carry this alone in my heart. I do not want to think every time I go among people, do you think they know this? Think they believe you? Because it is disgustingly burdensome and socially inhibiting. I'm always on alert. That day, something was taken from me that I will never get back. But I will continue to work on myself and finally return the shame. That is it for today's video. Thank you very much, as ever, for watching. I hope that you, if not necessarily enjoyed it, then took something from it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on social media, on either Twitter or Instagram, via the username @HITC Sevens.